Let me tell you everything that I know about Sergei Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall, and it might actually surprise you with how little it is. It might actually surprise you. So Sergei Pavlovich is something and one. And I think it's 29. It is an incredible amount of wins and one. That one was a UFC debut, and he got manhandled. He simply did not belong. He was in there, with Alistair Overeem. And I didn't feel as though Pavlovich, like so many others that debut the wrong way. The great Eddie Alvarez, who went on to be a world UFC champion, lost his debut into the UFC. Hector Lombard, who had won 22 straight, lost his debut in the UFC. Wanderlei Silva, who set the world on fire and will be recognized and renowned as one of the greats to have ever done it, lost his debut within the UFC. Randy the Natural Couture. The story over time changed that Randy was called the Natural because he had never used steroids. That changed over time, and it was fine for his image, and he let it go. But the reality was they called him the Natural because his debut, his first time, he didn't have those same negative performance and or jitters, whether it was a physicality or a mentality that reduces your abilities. He didn't have that. He was a natural. He could go out there on day one. In fact, on his debut, I know everything he did. He was a coach right up the road. 44 minutes from where I sit right now, which was 36 minutes from where I lived at that time. He was a wrestling coach at Oregon State University. Was in Oregon every day. Would not matter what he was doing in that gym. Wouldn't matter if he hung up a heavy bag. Wouldn't matter if he was jumping rope. I can tell you the MMA scene within Oregon. We did not have a jiu-jitsu black belt. Not at that time. Not one. Not one jiu-jitsu black belt lived in all of Oregon. And Randy didn't bring anybody in. Not to mention he didn't have the money to bring anybody in. There's not a boxing gym down in Corvallis. Like, it wouldn't really matter what he tells you he did to prepare. I can tell you what he did to prepare is he said he would do it, and then he went and showed up. He created on his own. He created this dirty body. Nobody showed him to do that or told him to do that. He was a Greco-Roman wrestler. He's used to pumming. He's used to collar ties. He knew punching was legal. He just figured it all out, and that's why they called him the Natural. And when I talk about everything I know about Sergei Pavlovich, that's kind of a lot. I know there is a misconception because of his Russian heritage and allegiance nationally that he was a great wrestler. That is a misconception. He was a wrestler, but he stopped at a very young age. He stopped at like 17 years old. And I share that because there's a new wave of guys that are coming through that are MMA fighters. Khabib and that team out of Dagestan might be the finest example that you see. They have never wrestled a day in their life. They never had a sambo match a day in their life. They never did a jiu-jitsu match. They never did a boxing match. They got right in MMA. And this began a period of time ago. This began around 2011, 2012, where your first crop of guys actually showed up with no background. And it wouldn't matter if you were like Jamal Hill and you were a basketball player, or you were like Eric Anders and you were a football player. I'm talking no sports background, day one into sports, MMA. And Sergei Pavlovich, why he did have that wrestling background up until the age of 17, he's a boy at 17, right? He's still a boy, he's a child. He largely does represent one of these crops of guys in this new era that were MMA fighters. So I would just correct that for you, just to let you know. He had plenty of good experiences, but they did end at a very young age. Just one of the reasons that he's so comfortable with those hands. It's one of the reasons that he knows how to use size. We see plenty of guys, particularly at heavyweight, that are bigger than their opponents, but they don't know how to use their size. We have guys that are strong. They don't know how to use their strength. We see guys with reach, right? Every tail of the tape's going to tell you has the reach advantage. When the last time you ever saw a guy with longer arms do well in a fist fight? It's not very often. Sure, you got your Jon Jones, you got your Volkanovskis out there. You got to go all the way back to Tommy Hearns. Guys don't know how to use that. Well, I have to, of course, throw Adesanya in there. They just don't know how to use some of these tools. It's one of the reasons that Pavlovich does. I also know, as far as a promotion goes, right, as far as the sport this guy's all in, as far as knowing that there is a business, the business is bigger and the sport operates inside of the business, not the other way around. As far as that goes, he hasn't the foggiest idea. And I do mean none. And that's everything I know about Sergei Pavlovich. Now, let me tell you about Tom. Tom Aspinall in front of everything else is a good-looking heavyweight. What does that mean? That's a weird term. He's a good-looking heavyweight. I got that from a college recruiter called Chuck Kearney. And Chuck Kearney, when he would look at guys, he wanted a good-looking and then fill in the blank. It could be a 33-pounder, it could be a 41-pounder. But Chuck would always look for length, and he always had to turn you around. He had to see you from behind. He wanted to see the broadness of your shoulders. That would help to tell him when he was recruiting particularly kids that are 17 and 18 years old, what size they were going to be once he gets them on a weightlifting program. It's just a big deal, but I remember that term, and I like it. And when you see a good-looking heavyweight like Tom, you're talking about a guy that's lean. You're talking about a guy that goes right around that 6'3.5", 6'4". You're talking about a guy that's got good reach, but not too long. Got enough height, but he's not just all legs where you're going to go out there and tackle him or he's weak. Talking about a guy maybe doesn't fill the full limit of 265, which is a little big for an endurance athlete, and this is absolutely an endurance sport. Tyson Fury has really broken the mold and broken the rules in terms of what a big guy can actually do over a period of time. But you won't see 3 or 4 or 5 guys like that. We've had a few guys that are tipping that limit of Brock Lesnar type, but he's never won a fight in championship rounds. I don't know that Brock has ever been to championship rounds. Just to use an example of a guy that's big and a name that you would know, and to talk about the trades. Aspinall's a good-looking heavyweight. But moreover is he's got the mentality. When Tom Aspinall came off of an injury, right? It's very important that you guys understand this. I've only seen Tom fight twice in my life. I watched him fight Curtis Blades for 22 seconds, which ended in an injury, and he lost the fight. And I believed in him that night. That night where he lost in really quite a unicorn, it's quite a strange situation that is highly unlikely to ever happen to anybody and even more unlikely to happen to you twice. But when he lost, I became a real believer. What I had seen is he walked him down. What I had seen is he measured him and started throwing those kicks even though it came back to hurt him. Then I see the return of Tom, and this is where the mentality comes in. He's out from Curtis. His dreams are taken away. I'm not the only one that was speaking this highly of Tom at the time. He had the whole world right in his hand, and the UFC was seeing it. It's why they were putting him in main events. They returned him off of an injury to another main event. Absolutely sold out. Big British stars on the card. He was the chosen one to go to the top of the bill at the O2 Arena, and he packed the house. So now you have a guy that's coming off an injury. How good could his training be? If he did everything that his coach asked of him, how good could it be? You sat for 10 months, you worked out for 2 months. But that didn't prevent him from signing up for the hardest thing that an athlete can do, which is a 5-round fight. And he didn't need all 5 rounds. In fact, he didn't even need a second round. So he goes out, he takes care of business, he grabs a microphone, and he alone, there was nobody in the sport, let alone the division, there was nobody in the sport that laid out what's next better than what Tom did, where he set up a fictional round robin. And he had it between some guy, himself, and Ciryl Gane. The some guy and the Ciryl, and they're going to fight in France, and Tom's going to take himself there, and he's going to challenge the winner, and the winner of that is going to go on, take on the winner of Jones and Stipe. Didn't have to play out perfectly, but it was the only plan that we'd ever heard. Nobody else prior to that, nobody since then has laid out a plan. The fellow heavyweights that are looking around and going, hey, wait a minute, Aspinall's 1-1 in his last 2. He's 1-1 in his last 2, and I got to go back 2 years to get how is he possibly fighting for a world championship at Madison Square Garden about to make a ton of money? How? The how is real simple. He's the only one who publicly had a plan. His plan, by the way, didn't even work. His plan was flawed from the jump. Himself, the some other guy, and Ciryl, that wasn't the right 3. They had to work Pavlovich in. So he laid out a plan that not only didn't work, it ignored Sergei Pavlovich. And wouldn't you know the irony, here's Tom, because Ciryl Gane wasn't smart enough, right? Ciryl Gane sandhagging that whole thing. This would very easily be Ciryl Gane's fight versus Pavlovich, which, could you imagine that matchup? That's a very different matchup, and it's a very compelling match. But when you have Ciryl Gane, who sandhagens his own career when Tom's sitting right there in the front row, you don't give Ciryl the nod. You don't do guys favors that sandhagen themselves. And that's the reason that Tom is in this spot. I just told you everything that I know about him. A guy who is 1-1 in his last two, and you got to go back 2 years to find both of those two, has taken every opportunity from every heavyweight, all of them, and he scooped them. And he's going to do it at Madison Square Garden, which is every athlete's dream. He's going to do all of those things because he had a plan. And his plan wasn't just a strategy. His plan told us, the audience, the level of courage that he has and the belief that he has in himself. As a matter of fact, nobody has called out Pavlovich. Every heavyweight, when they found out Pavlovich was in the backup spot, should have gone after him full force and said, that is BS. I want that spot. I would have taken it from him. Those 6 guys he knocked out all got one thing in common. They weren't me. They all should have gone after him. And collectively, all of the heavyweights said nothing. But after Ciryl Gane sandhagened the opportunity, after he did that, Tom went right to the media, and he told the media, that's fine. I'm not going to pick on him talking about Ciryl. I will move on. I will fight Pavlovich. To this day, nobody else has come in and said that they would fight Pavlovich. Nobody else has said that was their idea, that they're willing to do it, or that they would fight Tom. So you have Tom, who's 1-1 in his last two, and it took 2 years to get him. Do you understand what I'm saying? And he's the right guy for the opportunity. Because he showed a courage, and he showed a willingness, and he showed a belief in himself. And not only Tom, 1-1, I mean, are you hearing what I'm saying? 1-1 in his last two. Where's Curtis Blades just letting this go? Where's anybody just letting this go? All of them have stood back. None of them are willing to do it. None of them want in there with Pavlovich. I want to know what's the most interesting of everything, because it sounds like I just built Pavlovich up. I'm not so sure Tom should be in there. Kind of sounds like what I was saying. You've been to DraftKings lately? Tom Aspinall is the favorite.